Hi, and welcome to the mandatory work health and safety induction for all staff at the John Flynn College, James Cook University, Townsville. I am your trainer, Micah Wickham. I'm the Director and Principal Consultant of MySafe Solutions, and I have more than 12 years industry experience across a broad range of sectors, including mining, construction, transportation, education, manufacturing, tourism, and hospitality. I hold a graduate diploma of occupational health and safety and have advanced diplomas in business administration, management, civil construction, and counselling. Should you have any questions in regards to this training, please consult with the executive assistant. During this training, I'll be discussing the purpose of the training, the college structure, your workplace health and safety duties under the Work Health and Safety Act 2011, the college HSE management system, including policies and procedures, the college risk management system, including hazard identification and risk assessment, incident reporting, plant and structures, hazardous chemicals, and emergency management. And at the end of the session, you'll be required to answer a few questions and then sign off. Section 1, Introduction. During this training, it will cover general work health and safety and wellbeing topics. The training has been developed to inform workers of their core obligations and requirements under the Work Health and Safety Act 2011. Tailored training will be required outside of this induction that includes areas such as asbestos management, hazardous manual tasks, working at heights, risk assessment and control, incident investigation and injury management. This session will provide an overview of the health and safety and environmental arrangements at the college and how you can contribute to fostering and maintaining a safe and supportive culture at the workplace. Key areas of the workplace health and safety legislation include general risk and workplace management, hazardous work activities, plant and structures, hazardous chemicals and asbestos, and other key areas such as construction. Currently, the college structure is comprised of the college council, the principal, deputy principal, executive assistant, administration department, executive chef, sous chef and team, grounds and maintenance staff, housekeeping staff, residential support staff and assistants, residential tutors, student assistants, IT and photographer. Section 2, your workplace health and safety duties. In Queensland, the legislative framework for ensuring health and safety in workplaces is outlined in the Work Health and Safety Act 2011, the Work Health and Safety Regulation 2011, Work Health and Safety Codes of Practice, and the Workers' Compensation and Rehabilitation Act 2003. The college does have a range of procedures to assist campuses and the workers to meet their requirements of this legislation. Current policies and procedures can be found on the college server. See the executive assistant for further information. These procedures provide guidance to implement practices to provide safe, supportive, healthy working and learning environments for college workers and other persons involved at the college in college activities. Some of the college procedures include first aid, incident recording and management, communication and consultation, infection control, managing risks with chemicals, hazardous manual tasks, and injury management. Albert Einstein once said, "The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything." Do you actually walk past anyone in need? Do you instruct anybody to pick up after themselves? Do you see someone cutting corners at their workplace just to get their job done quickly? Make sure you look out for yourself and others at your work area. In the Workplace Health and Safety Act, it talks about the person conducting a business or undertaking. Duty holders are discussed in this Act. They discuss the PCBU, who includes persons with management or control of the workplace or in control of electrical equipment, persons with management or control of fixtures, plant structures, manufacturing of plants, substances, structures, or electrical equipment, importers, suppliers, persons who install or construct or commission plant, repairers of electrical equipment, and persons conducting a recognised external certification scheme. Currently at the college, it is set up as the College Council. They are the PCBU, so they are to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, the health and safety of their workers while at work. Officers include senior leaders or supervisors to exercise due diligence and to ensure their organisation complies with the workplace health and safety laws. And the officer can actually be found guilty of an offence regardless of whether the organisation has been found guilty or not. So who is responsible for workplace health and safety at work? Well, everybody is actually. Everybody is responsible to look out for themselves and others at work, and also not put others at risk. The Work Health and Safety Act 2011 states specific legislative duties for the person conducting a business or undertaking at the college, officers, senior leaders at the college, workers, all paid and unpaid workers, such as volunteers, and other persons that may be involved at the workplace. Duty holders must exercise due diligence, acquiring knowledge of health and safety issues, understanding operations and associated hazards with risks, ensuring that appropriate resources and processes are used to eliminate or minimize risk to health and safety, implementing processes for receiving and responding to information about incidents, hazards and risks, and establishing and maintaining compliance processes. They must also ensure that the PCBU complies, verifying the provision and use of resources mentioned above. So the PCBU would be the college, and they have developed a system and provide tools to support you as the worker to implement into the workplace and make sure that you are able to do your job safely. So to ensure that they comply with the legislation, it's very important for you as the worker to follow those procedures to the letter. And if those procedures are not relevant or don't work correctly that will allow you to do your job effectively, then please speak up. Please discuss this with your direct supervisor or go directly to the executive assistant or to the deputy principal. Due diligence. Senior leaders need to show due diligence by taking reasonable steps in accessing knowledge, understanding operations, hazards and risks, and always using appropriate resources and processes. So in the Workplace Health and Safety Act, it requires the PCBU to ensure, so far as reasonably practicable, that the health and safety of their workers while at work. So the college is considered a PCBU, as mentioned before, while senior leaders at the college hold overall responsibility of workplace health and safety and wellbeing compliance. Responsibilities are also delegated to work units, management, managers, principals to ensure compliance occurs across the entire workplace. So you as the worker can contribute to this compliance by undertaking your role in a safe, meaningful way, taking action safely, following procedures and local safe work practices. The college has safe work procedures that are in place. They've been developed to be simple, generally not too wordy, and they need to be easily implemented into the workplace. It's important for you to understand those, read those, and acknowledge that you'll adhere to those procedures for the college to ensure they comply with the Act. Management responsibilities. So managers, as we mentioned before, they're supervisors as well. They have to lead by example in the workplace. They have to actively promote a positive health and safety culture throughout the workplace, ensure staff understand and comply with their responsibilities. They implement consultation processes using clear communication, actively participate and encourage staff engagement in health and safety focused activities, ensure staff, students, and visitors are aware of workplace hazards. All employees are workers, including senior leaders, managers, principal, etc. So everybody has these duties to fulfill their role. Volunteers have the same legal responsibilities as a paid worker under the Workplace Health and Safety Act 2011. So anyone performing work has the same health and safety responsibilities. The college has a range of health and safety procedures, as mentioned before. These procedures talk about reporting hazards, reporting incidents, advising of sickness or absences, and following emergency procedures and participating in wellness activities. While at work, a worker must take reasonable care for their own health and safety. They take reasonable care for their acts or omissions, and they do not adversely affect the health and safety of others. They comply with reasonable instructions, cooperate with any reasonable policy or procedure relating to health and safety at workplace, and you have to make yourself aware of key emergency and health and safety contacts at the workplace. You have to report hazards, comply with the risk controls, report incidents, advise of sickness or absence, and follow these procedures. In the workplace health and safety legislation, it mentions reasonably practicable in relation to the duty to health and safety. This means that which is, or what is a particular time reasonably able to be done in relation to ensuring health and safety, taking into account and weighing up all relevant matters. So what that means is it talks about financial factors. It has to be practical to be implemented into the workplace. So it's all very well and good to implement a new system, but we need to understand whether that new system or new practice, new procedure is going to either introduce a new hazard or it's going to hinder productivity, or it's going to cause more problems than it's actually worth. Communication and consultation. It's essential for making decisions regarding health and safety in the workplace. Information gathered from all stakeholders is extremely important. Controls that are implemented without effective communication pathways can cause division, unwanted risks to people and the organisation. So an example of poor communication and consultation would be if the college had developed a new procedure or process, or implemented a new plant or structure or a piece of equipment, and then forgot to tell you about it, or they forgot to ask your input, your opinion. It's very important that we discuss whether this is going to be any process that's implemented by the college is going to be relevant, is going to be effective, that it actually helps you work better at the workplace. Types of communication or consultation avenues are health and safety representatives, if they're appointed, health and safety committee, if it's established, and regulators or workplace health and safety Queensland. They're the regulator in Queensland. Other states have different regulators relevant to them. Always discuss your work and health and safety matters with your direct supervisor first, and then if the matter's not resolved, then report it up the chain of command to the principal and deputy principal. Types of communication methods are staff meetings, training, emails, phone, memo, fax, or face-to-face discussion. Hazard and risk. So I hear this all the time. What's the difference between a hazard and risk? A hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm, and a risk is the likelihood that harm will occur from exposure to or contact with the hazard. Under the Workplace Health and Safety Act, employers must provide and maintain, as far as reasonably practicable, a safe working environment, safe systems of work, and provide plant and substances in a safe condition. This requires that hazards and risks are not only identified, but are effectively and actively managed to minimise the potential for harm. Both you and your principal or manager are responsible for controlling exposure to health and safety risks associated with the hazard in your workplace. There are many risks attributed to the college activities. Some of these risks include, health and safety, so personal injuries, reputation, media, financial resources, fallout from incidents, assets and facilities, buildings, structures, plant and equipment, compliance, so procedural compliance, monitoring and review, and human resourcing, so staffing. Section 3. The Health and Safety Environmental Management System, or HSE Management System. Currently, the document structure is comprised as so: Overarching Management System, or Integrated Management System, IMS. So this talks about the scope and the interaction of processes. Then we have the policies, procedures, process flowcharts and operational procedures, or safe work practices, forms, registers, checklists, templates, and records. So level 4 there is more of the tools that you would use at an operational level. Overarching systems document, so the integrated management system is it covers quality, safety, and environment. A list of policies that the college has include quality policy, health and safety, risk management, environmental, equal opportunity, return to work, child and young people safety, personal hygiene and food safety, and privacy. A list of procedures is listed here. As discussed before, please consult with the executive assistant to read any of these procedures. These are overarching procedures. You will be provided with a suite of safe work practices or safe operating procedures, which are smaller documents that are more relevant to your specific role within the campus. Registers, forms, and checklists include risk assessment form, hazard report form, incident report form, and so forth. You should be provided with a copy of these forms when working for the organisation. Please contact the Deputy Principal or Executive Assistant for further information on the college policies, procedures, and supporting documents. So the registers, forms, and checklists, every procedure has a supporting document or tool that could assist you in implementing the system. Forms and checklists, they will look very similar to this one here, which is the incident report form. Some of these things would be a register recording all data entered into the system, forms, which are tools to enter information onto. Checklists, these are used for things like inspection, audits, monitoring, guidance purposes. Section 5, Risk Management. So risk management is nothing to fear. Most of the choices we make each day involved an assessment of some form, whether we know it or not. Risk management is most effective when integrated into your daily routine. So there's no need to treat it as a separate chore or an extra requirement. You can effectively assess the risks of not going to work or crossing the street or eating 3-day-old leftovers. So at work, we need to make sure that we're able to demonstrate that we have considered the reasonably foreseeable hazards and risks. And to do this, we need to use a systematic approach and consultative approach aimed at removing, reducing the potential for harm to anyone in the workplace. Essentially, there's 4 steps here in the risk management process. These are: identify the hazard, assess the risks, control the risks, and review the control measures. Always important to review the control measures to make sure that they're effective. If we implement controls and we find out that it's hindering productivity, or it makes the service process worse than it actually needs to be, or it introduces new hazards, then we need to remove it and start again. So, identifying hazards. Some of the hazards are pretty obvious, such as sun exposure, which groundskeeping or maintenance might have, using chemicals or lifting heavy objects. Other hazards may not be obvious, and some can take effect on a person over time, such as stress or asbestos exposure. You may be able to identify the hazards by observing how people work, how plant and equipment is used, safe or unsafe work practices, or how neatly the workplace is kept, what chemicals are around, and what they're used for. If you identify a hazard at your workplace, it requires action. Speak with your principal or supervisor or health and safety advisor to ensure that the hazard is controlled. Take responsibility for safety. If you can remedy the issue immediately, then do so. The college has an important role in reviewing identified workplace hazards and associated incident records. Some of the methods of identifying hazards are workplace inspections and audits, hazard and risk assessments, work cover notices, incident reports, training, and staff meetings. So, controlling the risk. There's a process called the hierarchy of control, and this includes elimination, substitution, isolation, engineering, administrative measures, and personal protective equipment. So when you're choosing to address or implement control measures to address a hazard, it's important to look at the hierarchy of control. And obviously we're trying to eliminate the hazard. We're trying to remove it completely from being an issue. So elimination is removing the harm to prevent the risk. Substitution means you replace it with something else less harmful. So a chemical, you would replace it with something that's not as hazardous or toxic. Isolation, you separate the people from the harm. So putting barriers in place. Engineering, you change the work processes or the physical environment. So you redesign work, you redesign plant and equipment or components or the premises. Administrative measures, so apply administrative arrangements such as safe work procedures or signage, safety signage. Personal protective equipment is always the last line of attack for controls. So using personal protective equipment is great, but it's also not the first thing you should be thinking about. Safety glasses, safety vest, steel cap shoes, earplugs, hat, sunscreen, those sort of things, yes, they come part and parcel with your daily work routine. However, if you identify new hazards and we want to control them, the first thing we need to look at is if we can eliminate or remove the harm to prevent the risk. So if a control measure is identified through a risk management process, it must be put in place before the work curriculum activity starts. So if the control measure is not available or it's unpractical, then an equivalent alternative risk control measure is to be implemented in its place prior to the activity starting. If a control measure is identified, it must be used. Reporting the hazard. So the college has a hazard report system. Consult with the executive assistant to obtain a copy of this form. Using this form allows us to put any hazard that we've identified in writing as we implement control measures to reduce risk to workers. Monitoring and review controls. The process of reviewing the effectiveness of control measures is to undertake the workplace task with the control measures in place, assess the new safety procedures for the task while it's being undertaken and after it is completed, and reassess the level of risk associated to ensure the acceptable level of safety has been achieved. The risk management process is a systematic consultative approach aimed at removing or reducing a potential for harm to anyone in the workplace. The 4 steps of risk management, as I mentioned before, are identifying the risks. So find out what could cause the harm, assess the risk, understand the nature of the harm that could be caused by the hazard, how serious the harm could be, and the likelihood of it happening. Control the risks, implement the most effective control measure that is reasonably practicable in the circumstances, and review the controls to ensure that they're working as planned and that this fits with your reflective practice as a worker at the college. All incident records must be kept confidential. The college will release information that has been reviewed to ensure privacy is maintained and the college reputation is upheld. All injuries and incidents must be reported to your supervisor. Please use the incident report form. Don't wait for months and then report the occurrence. It's important to report incidents as soon as possible, as I mentioned before, to reduce the potential for further exacerbation of any injuries, to prevent any the incident from happening again. Early reporting can also help the college prevent these things from happening again. Workplace rehabilitation. The college will make reasonable efforts to support you and stay in the workplace following any injury or illness. Timely and effective rehabilitation assists you as the employee to recover and return to a meaningful and productive workplace environment. The college's injury and illness management procedure details responsibilities and processes for supporting injured or ill employees safely back at work. Your rehabilitation coordinator will be the deputy principal unless otherwise advised. The Workers' Compensation and Rehabilitation Act 2003 outlines the framework for providing compensation to employees who sustain work-related injuries or illnesses. If you sustain an injury or illness in the course of your employment, you can lodge a compensation claim with WorkCover Queensland. To support a claim, it is important that health and safety incidents are recorded in the college workplace health and safety system at the time of the incident. So if you are injured, it's really extremely important that you report the incident within a reasonable time frame. That time frame obviously needs to take into account your ability to report the incident, but it's ideal to do it within a 48 hour period. So, emergency information. The Fire and Rescue Service Act 1990 and the Building Fire Safety Regulation 2008 require that a plan of action be maintained so that in the event of a fire, all people are safe at the workplace. Workers be provided with instruction to general evacuation procedures. Local induction information needs to be provided to staff regarding the specific emergency response and evacuation procedures for the workplace. This should include showing staff emergency evacuation site maps that direct you to the closest exit points and evacuation assembly points. A walkthrough of your workplace to demonstrate exit points is important. Emergency alarm sounds will be explained to you. Evacuation routes and assembly points is recommended. The college has emergency response plans, obviously displayed around all of its buildings. Separate training is available on evacuation procedures and emergency response. You yourself must make yourself aware of the building's emergency wardens. The site fire management plan will be displayed and provided to you as well. This picture is a current copy of the site fire management layout plan. Please familiarise yourself with it and the site's building layout and where the emergency assembly area is. This is an example of a site map that provides information on emergency evacuation and the location of emergency equipment. The college has these maps displayed in each building, providing details of emergency exits, evacuation routes, assembly points, alarms, fire extinguishers, and other emergency equipment. First aid contacts at the college. The first point of contact for all health and safety and wellbeing matters is the college deputy principal or executive assistant. Consult the list of first aid officers in the staff clock-in area. Workplace health and safety legislation requires the college to have assessed the risks attributed to the use of plant, equipment and structures on its site. This starts by assessing the risk using a simple to use checklist that is designed to cover many aspects of the plant and equipment used on site. All plant and equipment must be risk assessed before it is used on site. Most plant and equipment used at the college already have been assessed and safe work procedures have been developed. These should be made available to where the equipment is located. Personnel using the equipment must be adequately trained, qualified and authorised prior to its use. Conduct regular maintenance and safety inspection checks to ensure that the equipment is still safe to use. So the safe work procedures are, as I mentioned before earlier in the induction, is that they are very simple procedures, usually 1 to 2 pages long, and they will highlight the main focus points or the hazards involved with using that plant and equipment. If there's anything in those procedures that are not relevant to you or not easily implemented, the controls are not easily implemented, then please speak up, report this to the executive assistant and we will try and have it changed. High-risk work activities, high-risk construction activities are mentioned in the Workplace Health and Safety Act 2011. It includes, but is not limited to, risk of persons falling more than 2 metres, involves demolition work of a load-bearing equipment, also demolition of an element of structure that is related to the physical integrity of a structure, involves also or is likely to involve disturbing asbestos, which is definitely relevant to the college, involves structural alteration or repair that requires temporary support to prevent collapse, is carried out near a confined space, carried out or near a shaft or trench or deeper than 1.5 metres or a tunnel, and is carried out on or near pressurised gas mains or piping. It also includes chemicals, fuel or refrigerant lines. It's carried out in an area that may have contaminated or flammable atmospheres. Involves tilt-up or precast concrete, is carried out on or adjacent to a road, railway, shipping lane, or traffic corridor in use by traffic or other pedestrians, is carried out in an area of a workplace where there is any movement of powered mobile plant, is carried out in areas with artificial extremes of temperature or near water or other liquid sources that could involve a risk of drowning. Safe work method statements. You may have heard of these before, but any high-risk activity requires a safe work method statement to be in place. Generally, this will be conducted by contractors to the college. They will be required to supply a safe work method statement, or SWIMS is what they call it, to ensure that they have conducted the risk assessment safely and that they will ensure that effective controls are in place. A SWIMS is a document that outlines a high-risk construction work activity that's to be carried out at the workplace, the hazards that may arise from these activities, and the measures that they put in place to control the risks. SWIMS are required for high-risk construction activities as defined in the Workplace Health and Safety Regulation 2011. For works carried out on regular, basic, or generic work, generic SWIMS may be prepared and used for those work activities. The content of the SWIMS can be refined over time and include consultation with workers and other persons conducting a business or undertaking. Now, most of the works done by college workers will either be supported by a safe work procedure. So this has already been risk assessed, so therefore we don't need a SWIMS to support that. It's only for new construction work activities that may be occurring at the workplace. Also includes like electrical work and things like that. Hazardous chemicals. When using hazardous chemicals in the workplace, the following legislation applies. Work Health and Safety Act 2012 or 2011 in Queensland. Dangerous Substances Act 1979 and Dangerous Substances Regulations 2002. Codes of practice, example, preparation of safety data sheets for hazardous chemicals, labelling of workplace health and safety, workplace hazardous chemicals, managing the risks of hazardous chemicals in the workplace. So there's two broad types of hazards associated with hazardous chemicals. One is health and the other is psychochemical hazards. So many chemicals have both health and psychochemical hazards attributed to them. Health hazards these are properties of a chemical that have the potential to cause adverse health effects. Adverse health effects can be acute, like headaches, nausea, vomiting, or skin corrosion, or they could be chronic, so long-term asthma, dermatitis, nerve damage, or cancer. Psychochemical hazards, these are physical or chemical properties of the substance, mixture or article that pose a risk to the workers and other health risks, as they do not occur as a consequence of the biological interaction of the chemical with people. They arise with an inappropriate handling or use and can often result in injury to people and or damage of property as a result of the intrinsic physical hazard. So examples of this include flammable or explosion, corrosive, chemically reactive and oxidizing chemicals. Possible routes of entry. Chemicals can enter the body and harm us via the following routes of exposure. Inhalation, so breathing it in. Absorption through the skin or eyes. Needle stick injection or ingestion, eating or swallowing. Risk assessment of chemicals. The college must manage risks associating with using, handling, generating or storing of hazardous chemicals. When managing the risks, regard must be had to the following factors: the hazardous properties of the hazardous chemical, any potential hazardous reaction, so chemical or physical, between the hazardous chemical and other substance or mixture, including a substance that may be generated by a reaction, the nature of the work being carried out with the hazardous chemical, and any structure, plant, or system of work that is used in the use of handling, generation, or storage of the hazardous chemical and could interact with the hazardous chemical at the workplace. When controlling chemical hazards, the hierarchy of control is always the best way to consult it and identify the best possible method of controlling it. Eliminate it. Elimination of the chemical process. So, like I mentioned before, using something that's less toxic. Substitution of the chemical is that removal process. If you stop using the chemical entirely, then that eliminates it. Engineering, so ventilation would be a part of engineering, so fume hoods, canopy hoods, filtration systems. Engineering with isolation could be a glove box for handling toxics. Remote controls performing certain work after hours. Administrative, modifying work schedules, air monitoring, training, work methods, signage, and health monitoring. PPE would include gloves, respirators, goggles, lab coats, and enclosed footwear. Duties in relation to chemicals. The workplace health and safety regulations include specific duties for the college and other PCBUs to manage the risks to the health and safety associated with using, handling, and generating and storing hazardous chemicals at the workplace. Officers such as the college council, the principal, have a duty to exercise due diligence to ensure that the business or undertaking complies with the workplace health and safety and regulations. This includes taking reasonable steps to ensure that the business or undertaking has and uses appropriate resources and processes to eliminate and minimize risks that arise from hazardous chemicals at the college. Most of the time, this will actually happen, or hazardous chemicals will be used in areas such as the housekeeping or within the maintenance department or groundskeeping departments. Duties of officers. The duties include maintaining a register of hazardous chemicals, identifying risk of physical or chemical reaction of hazardous chemicals and ensuring the stability of hazardous chemicals, ensuring that the exposure standards are not exceeded, provision of health monitoring to workers if that's required, provision of information, training, instruction and supervision of workers and records are kept, provision of spill containment system for the hazardous chemicals if necessary, and obtaining a current safety data sheet or SDS from the manufacturer, importer or supplier of the chemical. Further duties include ensuring chemicals are correctly labelled and remain labelled. The labelling must be clear as well. Controlling ignition sources and accumulation of flammable or combustible substances. Provision and availability of fire protection, firefighting equipment and emergency and safety equipment. Preparing emergency plans if the quantity of class of hazardous chemical at the workplace exceeds the manifest quantity of the hazardous chemical. Stability and support of the containers for bulk hazardous chemicals, including pipework and attachments. Decommissioning of underground storage and handling systems, and notifying the regulator as soon as practicable of abandoned tanks in certain circumstances. So labelling, as I mentioned before, all chemical packages, containers, tanks or bulk stores must be clearly labelled with following information: the product identifier, proper shipping name and UN number if the chemical is dangerous goods, the contact details of the manufacturer or importer, identify the proportion of each ingredient, any hazardous pictogram or dangerous goods class label for transport, any hazard statement, signal word and precautionary statement, any information about the hazards, first aid and emergency procedures, and the expiry date. Labels and safety data sheets. Labels, when a substance is decanted from the original container and not used immediately, or it's given to someone else, then the decanted container must have a label which states the product identifier or the name, and the hazard pictogram or hazard statement. So don't write on the container with a NICO to say this is terps or this is methylated spirits. It actually must have a proper label on it. The SDS, a safety data sheet, is a chemical information sheet provided by the manufacturer or supplier of chemicals. It describes the identity, properties, uses, precautions for safe use and handling procedures and of the hazardous chemical. The SDS must be readily available at each location of where the chemical is used. Safety data sheets continued. The college suppliers must provide a safety data sheet for the hazardous chemical when the chemical is first supplied to the workplace, and if the SDS is amended, when the hazardous chemical is first supplied to the workplace after the SDS is amended as well. The college must obtain the safety data sheet and any amended version for a hazardous chemical from the manufacturer, importer or supplier no later than when the chemical is first supplied to the workplace or as soon as reasonably practicable after it's first supplied. The register is the hazardous substances register is a list of all of the product names used at the workplace. So this will tell us how old the SDS is. It'll also have a link to the SDS document. It all will be within 5 years of its expiry date. Must be updated as the new hazardous chemicals are introduced to the workplace or when the use of the particular hazardous chemical is discontinued. The college must ensure that the register of hazardous chemicals at the workplace is prepared and kept up to date. The register must be readily accessible to workers involved in using, handling or storing hazardous chemicals and to anyone else who is likely to be affected by the hazardous chemical at the workplace. Empty or unclean containers. So if a container is not cleaned to a condition as if it had never contained the hazardous chemical, then the container must be labelled. Any uncleaned containers must be included when calculating placards or manifest quantities, mostly in the case of a liquid. Quantity means the net capacity in litres of the container. So one of the examples that I have seen time and time again with groundskeeping or maintenance is where items such as weed killer has been decanted into a large spray bottle, and then that substance has been used and the container is now emptied, but the container does not have any labels in it. So if that container is used for multiple products, that container must be cleaned out entirely before the new product is put into the container. The reason being is that you don't want to mix, or you cannot mix, these hazardous chemicals together. But also it's important that we understand what's in those containers. Thank you very much for listening to this induction. So now what I'd ask you to do is complete the short questionnaire as part of your compulsory induction, and then sign off and hand this into your executive assistant. Thank you for your time.